The Israeli government spending millions of dollars to influence U.S. politicians and colleges. This is a bombshell story that came out from The Guardian and the New York Times, as well as Haaretz. Last November, Amichai Hickley, he is a minister in the Israeli government. He was called to the Knesset, which is Israel's parliament, and his goal was to squash the growing anti-war protests among young people in the United States, especially at top universities. So Hickley told Israeli lawmakers, quote, "I think we should, especially in the United States, be on the offensive," meaning he wanted to actively fight back against Israel's critics. Now think about that. A foreign government planning how to counter protests in our country. And what does that say about the type of influence they think they have here? So Hickley went on to lead a major campaign to counter these critics. The Guardian found evidence that Israel relaunched a controversial program called Voices of Israel, which is formerly known as Concert. Now, this program was set up to influence public opinion in the US and Europe. This time, Hickley wanted to launch it to redefine anti-Semitism in US law to include harsh criticisms of Israel. Do we hold any other country to that same standard? Do we say if you criticize China, for example, you're xenophobic or maybe you're anti-Buddhist? Well, in the hearing, Hickley told Israeli lawmakers there was new money in the budget for this campaign, meaning they already have a budget that they use to influence America's perception and policies on Israel. This would be additional money. This new money would fund 80 different programs aimed at promoting Israel's narrative, funded separately from their traditional PR purse. Now, the result? Well, from October to May, Israel spent about $8.6 million on these efforts to influence thinking and policy throughout the West. Should we be okay with a foreign government we call an ally, especially spending millions of dollars to influence American colleges and U.S. policies? You might think you're okay with it now when it's a nation you like, but what about when it's a nation you don't? It's important to note that the money Israel was giving to various advocacy groups were carefully selected American advocacy groups. So basically, you have a lot of Americans in this country who love a foreign Middle Eastern country so much they're willing to take money from that country and use it to influence Americans. But this provides a cover for Israel because it's not Israeli groups doing the influencing, it's American groups taking Israeli money. There's a slight difference, apparently. Now, one of the American groups working closely with Hickley's ministry is the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, also referred to as ISGAP. So ISGAP lobbied for congressional investigations into universities, pushing the idea that protests against Israel's actions were motivated by anti-Semitism rather than the brutal onslaught we were all watching unfold in real time on social media. The group didn't care. They aimed to redefine anti-Semitism to include harsh criticism of Israel and anti-Zionism as hate speech, and they quickly saw results. In December, there was a heavily viewed congressional hearing about anti-Semitism on college Ivy League campuses. You probably saw this hearing with several Ivy League presidents being asked by Representative Elise Stefanik if calls for genocide, which to be clear were actually chants to free Palestine, were against campus policy. Now that hearing heavily cited ISGAP's research. And in the end, most of the college presidents ended up resigning, and dozens of pieces of policy have been presented to Congress to redefine anti-Semitism, to put it into law. Now, the chair of ISGAP hasn't been shy about the group's influence. He proudly took credit for getting these presidents fired, saying, quote, "All these hearings were the result of our report that all these universities, beginning from Harvard, are taking a lot of money from Qatar." I mean, it's interesting how he's concerned about other organizations taking money from a foreign Middle Eastern country, but he fails to mention his own organization is also taking money from a foreign Middle Eastern country. Is it good for our nation to have research from foreign-funded groups with a very clear agenda shaping our congressional hearings and affecting the careers of Americans? Is this really for the benefit of our country or someone else's? Well, several other American groups were given money by Voices of Israel to support pro-Israel initiatives. The National Black Empowerment Council published a letter from Black Democratic politicians pledging solidarity with Israel. Cyberwell, a pro-Israel group fighting disinformation, partnered with TikTok and Meta to screen and edit content, even calling for Meta to suppress the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Should tech giants like TikTok and Meta be working with foreign-backed groups to control what we see and say online? Our political class nearly had a hernia when they thought Russia or China was doing just that. Yet when Israel does it, they openly support it. In fact, they go above and beyond. TikTok hasn't been compliant enough, which is what the impetus was for passing legislation that effectively bans the platform in the coming months. Turns out videos of innocent little kids being bombed is bad PR for Israel. Well, reports from Haaretz and the New York Times also revealed that Hickley's ministry hired a PR firm to secretly pressure American lawmakers using hundreds of fake social media accounts to post pro-Israel and anti-Muslim content. All of these accounts posed as Americans, aimed at politicians, trying to trick them into believing that their American constituents wanted them to support Israel. The Israeli ministry denied doing this, but investigations revealed they actually paid $2 million towards these fake campaigns, posing as Americans, Israelis, trying to influence our American politicians. They also enlisted pro-Israel U.S. student groups funded by Israeli sources to participate. Hillel International, a large Jewish campus group, received financial and strategic support from Mosaic United, which was backed by Hickley's ministry. Hillel CEO Adam Lehman reported back to the Knesset about their success, including MIT suspending its Students for Justice in Palestine chapter for, quote, creating an unwelcoming environment for Jewish students. Shouldn't we all be outraged by this? An American student group influencing our kids and then reporting back to a foreign Middle Eastern country's parliament about its success? Israel's influence on our policies hasn't just come from Hickley's campaign. Let's talk about AIPAC, American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and others like it. Now, these lobbies wield immense power by giving tons of money to American lawmakers' campaigns, and they operate without the scrutiny that other foreign agents face. Now, how is it that these pro-Israel lobbies, which clearly work to influence U.S. policy, do not have to register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, also known as FARA? FARA requires individuals representing foreign governments or entities in a political or quasi-political capacity to disclose their relationships and activities to the U.S. government. Recently, we've seen several members of the Trump administration either be convicted or suspected of violating the FARA Act, including Paul Manafort, Rudy Giuliani, and Rick Gates for lobbying on behalf of Ukraine, and Michael Flynn for lobbying on behalf of Turkey, for example, both of which, by the way, are allied countries. Yet we still went after these guys. So what makes Israel so unique? Well, AIPAC and similar organizations claim they're merely domestic lobbying groups. Now, how do they make that claim? Well, first, pro-Israel lobbies argue that their primary mission is to support U.S.-Israel relations from a domestic perspective rather than acting as foreign agents. They claim they represent American citizens who support Israel and that they don't represent Israel. Secondly, most of their money comes from these Americans and not from Israel. That's how they sort of get around this. However, AIPAC directly lobbies for pro-Israel policies, not for pro-Jewish American policies. CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, for example, advocates for all Muslim Americans, regardless of which country they come from. They advocate for civil rights legislation, to anti-discrimination measures, and immigration and refugee policies. They don't have a specific country they lobby on behalf of in the Muslim world. They're not advocating for pro-Saudi Arabia or pro-Malaysia or pro-Pakistan policies, for example. AIPAC, on the other hand, does very specifically advocate for pro-Israel policies. They just do it under the guise of, lots of Americans want us to do this. And of course, who controls the legislation of the FARA Act? Congress. And since Congress is heavily bought off by these pro-Israel lobbies, they're never going to make the rules against them. So let's look at some numbers. Since 1998, AIPAC has spent over $254 million on lobbying efforts. Here are a few examples of individual politicians and the money they've received from pro-Israel lobbies. Chuck Schumer received over $1.7 million. Lindsey Graham received over $1.2 million. Steny Hoyer, $1.1 million. Mitch McConnell, over $1 million. Representative Richie Torres received over $1.5 million. These lobbies are contributing this heavily to political campaigns in order to ensure that U.S. policies remain favorable to Israel. In return, what do we see? Unwavering support for Israel's actions, even when they are controversial or against international consensus. We see waves of politicians taking their trips to Israel, visiting the Wailing Wall, signing bombs, even though the vast majority, by the way, are Christians. They're going to the Wailing Wall, doing something that I believe Jewish people do, but these Christians are doing it because what are they doing? They're just, showing how much support they've got. Shouldn't American citizens be fully aware of our politicians receiving substantial foreign money to shape U.S. policies on behalf of that foreign country? Especially if those policies come at the expense of Americans' money, moral, and rights. Shouldn't these lobbies, and quite frankly, all of these politicians taking this money, which is nearly all of them, be subjected to the same regulations as Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, and Rudy Giuliani? The American people deserve to know who is really pulling the strings behind the scenes. Why is it that we independent journalists are often accused of being paid by foreign governments to spread their propaganda? Yet, unlike most members of Congress, many of us have never taken a dime. Yet we face endless threats of being investigated for being a foreign asset. Why are we not holding politicians, the ones who actually make laws in war, to the same standards as journalists? We need to demand greater transparency and ensure that our policies reflect the true interests of the American people and not the strategic goals of Israel. We should be demanding from our politicians that they redefine the FAR Act to include any sort of support for Israel. We should make it completely unacceptable for members of Congress to use foreign-backed studies to get Americans fired and to initiate laws that censor American speech. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson show. That's right, this is just a clip. If you want the full show, you can go to KimIversonShow.com and you can watch Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern for about 1 hour. It's totally free. Check it out, KimIversonShow.com. Thanks for watching.